Hello, listeners, and welcome to the Peggy Smedley Show. I'm Peggy Smedley, and it's a great day to be on the radio. And actually, we're live today in the studio, and I have a great guest for you today. And if you don't know who this is, I'm going to tell you who it is. This is Chuck Byers. And Chuck, you are with Cisco. Now, I've got to say, you have a wonderful career. You've been, now I think if I've got this right, you were with Bell Labs, you were a fellow there, and then you were with Alcatel-Lucent, am I correct? And then you've also got 69 patents. I'm telling you, who has 69 patents? That's pretty impressive.
Well, thanks, Medley. And I'm really very happy to be here. Thanks for inviting me. And I'm really interested in talking about IoT today. This is really important to
So now, you've been with Cisco, I think, for the past decade. You are now 10 years. So now let's see. You are principal engineer and platform architect with Cisco's Corporate Strategic Innovation Group. You guys have big titles over there. I mean, you guys don't make it easier for all of us, right?
Yeah. Basically, our job is to take a look at the technology futures and understand what they mean to our business. So IoT is one of our pet projects at the Corporate Strategic
But
Innovation
you guys
Group.
are all looking at all of that. You guys are involved in all the fog computing right now. You're involved in the fog computing consortium, you guys, right? Is that what you have
Yeah, we
going?
founded the Open Fog Consortium, and we'll talk a little bit about what that is and how it applies to the IoT problems in front of us.
And there's a lot when we think about what's happening with Internet of Things. We've got a lot of challenges, but a lot of opportunities, correct?
Absolutely.
So let's talk about that. For any of our listeners and who are trying to understand this, what are we really talking about when we want to talk about what is interoperability? And because we're going to talk about what the edge and fog computing and all that is, but let's start with interoperability. Let's talk about what's happening right now. I think in the space, for anybody who's trying to understand what the challenges are for interoperability in the Internet of Things today.
Well, the problem with interoperability is you've got to somehow standardize or at least drive the market in a common direction. And I was just at an excellent conference a couple of weeks ago called the IoT Evolution Expo. It was in Orlando. And they did a sort of informal survey of how many IoT platforms there are. And the numbers are between 350 and 900 different platforms. So how are you going to achieve interoperability if there's 900 different flavors of how you do IoT, data abstraction and interconnectivity and all of these things that you need to work correctly together to build a cohesive network? If there's 900 different variants, how are you going to pull that together?
The same thing we're talking about like in the home, right? You know, because we have the big dogs fighting it out. We have Amazon, we have Google, now we have Apple, and everybody wants to own the home. If that's still happening at the manufacturing level, when we talk about interoperability, it's going to be a struggle. And we saw this with manufacturers big time trying to do it on the factory floor. So now when we talk about the Internet of Things across all industries, it's so pervasive right now. It's a challenge, right? I mean, that's what we're talking about.
Absolutely. And interoperability is one of the key challenges that faces our industry. We've got to figure out how to somewhat come up with a common language, some mechanism whereby if I am, for example, a smart city IoT application and I take a bunch of data from a bunch of sensors, it's entirely possible that the smart transportation that runs through that smart city, they need to grab those sensors and actuator readings off of the smart city, but work it in the smart transportation. So the idea of siloed solutions for each vertical, we got to get away from that because there really are no more pure applications. There's no more pure medical applications or pure education applications or pure smart transportation applications. It's all various kinds of mashups. And we need interoperability across those vertical markets in order to make it work.
In the manufacturing space, I used to say we had to set those egos aside because we had some big egos back when it was Honeywell and Fisher-Rosemont in those days who couldn't play nice, and they did. They said, and we came up with some really great things. You know, we found a way to come up with the SP50. We found out that how ISA and all of those could work together, and now we have some really great things happening. Now we have the Internet of Things. We have a lot of companies that have to come together and try to figure out how do you do things. But I think it's bigger than that now. I think the challenge is much greater because we're not talking about one industry. I mean, we're talking about like common data standards that have to plug and play amongst everything. We're talking about common gateway. We're talking about devices. We're talking about sensors that have to be on streetlights and in cars and in our homes and all of those things. And it's a greater challenge, right?
Oh, absolutely. It's all got to work together. One of the biggest challenges is keeping it all secure. Because,
oh, forget that. That ain't going to happen. I mean,
we've got some ideas.
Well,
it's a work in progress.
You're going to throw in quantum computing now, and now you're going to throw all that security out the door because now the challenge is going to be even more. Now, I know we're going to talk about fake news, right? But that's a whole nother thing.
I believe in quantum computing's threat to IoT security. I just think that that the arms race is going to get won by the good guys. I've got faith in that.
But when you talk about security, I mean, we're kidding around here for a sec, but I think there is a challenge there. I mean, that security, we're always fighting the bad actors. Yeah. How do we beat them? You say we can win, but are we going to? Because it's like a nose race to the finish line, right? We're at this constant fighting, struggling there, and who's going to win out is a challenge, right?
Yeah, it's there's a couple of interesting points about security. One is that the stakes are much higher in IoT world than in traditional information technology world. And one of the reasons why the stakes are higher is because IoT doesn't just have sensors and a bunch of computers that have data stored on them. It's got these actuators, these things that let the internet control the physical world. And as soon as a hacker can control the physical world, the stakes are elevated, right? I mean, yeah, sure, data breaches like, Target and all of the credit reporting stuff that we hear about every day, that's awful inconvenient and awful expensive, but I don't think anybody died as a result of it. If my locomotive or my refinery gets taken over by somebody, there's real problems associated with hazards and people dying.
Because you're now talking about something which I think sometimes people have to step over the line and understand. We're talking about critical infrastructure type things. We're talking about our water. We're talking about the things that are dams, bridges, electricity, things that you just described. And then you're talking about that life vital kind of things that we talk about.
Yep.
I mean,
high power systems with large attack surfaces and large stakes associated with bad guys trying to take them over, hold them for ransom, use them as terror weapons, lots of problems. So I think one of the ways that Cisco, who's trying to do an end-to-end security on this IoT marketplace, one of the ways that I think we're hoping to stay one step ahead of the bad guys is through the application of very strong computation technologies. So we're looking at machine learning, we're looking at various kinds of cognitive systems, we're looking at intent-based systems that we basically know what we think the system should behave like under normal circumstances, and then we have automatic mechanisms to detect when we deviate from that normal behavior. And then we have mechanisms to automatically correct that. So we have ways that we can isolate and determine where the problem is and apply automatic countermeasures. Ultimately, this has got to go faster than humans can do it. We can't have a bunch of security professionals in a boiler room somewhere saying, ooh, that smells like a naughty program. Let's do something about that. You're never going to win that because the bad guys got AIs and they've got machine learning systems. And we have to have bigger ones than them in order to stay ahead of it.
It's a great point that you bring up because we hear a lot about Watson, right? Not to bring up a competitor, but I think it's a great analogy to kind of look at because you have to think differently than the bad guy because the bad guy is always trying to think like we as humans, but when we look at machine learning and we look at AI, it has to think faster. And what we learned with Watson, so to speak, is they figured out moves that were different than we were going to make, right? The idea, and that's what you're saying now is you have to, that smell, what is it going to be? You're now saying at Cisco is that you're thinking differently and outside of the norm of how the average human is going to think. And that's the way we're going to beat the bad actors, as I like to say. We're going to outsmart them because they're thinking like the average human is thinking.
Absolutely right. And we've got a lot of work to do, but we're very optimistic that we can manage to stay one step ahead.
Let's take a step back and let's go back to the interoperability because when we define the I like to say when we define the concepts of Internet of Things, we've always said people, places, devices, and how they communicate with those things that we're saying and connect it to the internet. That's what we kind of say. Then you guys at Cisco always said, we want to look at it in a broader sense. Now when we bring in interoperability, how do we define that? And I know that you guys have like a real definition that you want to say interoperability, because I think it's important that we say, how are we connecting and bringing this interoperability together? Because I think when we talk about it, it gets so broad that people don't really, I don't think we've helped our audience and our listeners understand what are we really saying here, because I think everybody defines it differently. Now when we talk about the Internet of Things, I think people are like, what is the Internet of Things? Is it blockchain? Is it machine learning? Is it AI? And it's all of those things, but then that too is what we need to think about when we think about interoperability, right?
Absolutely. So here's a definition from ISO and IEC. It's the ability of two or more systems or applications to exchange information and to mutually use the information that's been exchanged. So that's a pretty high-level definition, but it's really about the data model. It's about the information as the currency of the IoT, and we don't want a bunch of isolated silos. We want the ability for that information to flow freely, vertically between the cloud and the fog and the edge and the smart IoT devices, and horizontally across all of the different vertical marketplaces, different suppliers of equipment, different folks who might be working on the data and want to use that data. Interoperability is about greasing the skids to make sure that all of that stuff flows seamlessly.
So we talk about all of these devices and bringing them together and making it. Are we talking about looking at all kinds of things in connecting when you guys are talking about consortiums, the Open Fog Consortium? Lately, there's a lot of talk about Li-Fi and how that's going to play into all of this. Are all of these going to come together too? Or we just now got a whole nother thing? Because sensors are going to play a great role in everything we do. Lighting and all of these things. Will all of these groups have to play nice? I always like saying the same sandbox, we'll bring up our kid role there. But is that something that's going to have to come in here? Because we're talking about, there's so many billions of devices we're talking about. Everything's going to be connected. I used to say, why do we want to connect our toothbrushes? But for heaven's sake, they're going to be connected.
My dentist and dental insurance company might want my toothbrush connected.
Exactly. Yeah. Wants to know if you're brushing for 2 minutes every morning, to save on your dental insurance. But that question is, are all of those things going to be, you're going to have to be a really effective consortium like you're talking about, and all these others, because you mentioned at the onset of our conversation, there's so many out there. You're all going to have to kind of come together, as you just said, in that interoperability. And now we're all hearing about Li-Fi coming into play, and then you're going to have to tell me about that.
Sure.
But are they all going to have to come in? Because every time I turn around, there's a new one emerging that's got some story to tell.
Yep. There's lots of different aspects to interoperability. And certainly the physical connectivity between things and the computation, networking, storage capabilities that the network brings to those things. So in the Open Fog Consortium, we're particularly concerned about what it means to interconnect and sort of referee all of this wild west of interconnected space. We've got a taxonomy that kind of blows out how things talk to the network. And the first split is wired versus wireless. And wired might include things that are delivered on fiber and things that are delivered on copper. And then wireless would consider, we'd probably divide that 2 or 3 ways. One would be the unlicensed spectrum, the sort of Wi-Fis of the world. And the other would be the licensed spectrum, the cell network derivatives of the world. And the third one, I would argue, is the optical wireless, the Li-Fi, the free space optical communications world, which has very significant advantages and a few important disadvantages. But the most significant advantages is that you got essentially infinite bandwidth, and you don't have to pay any government spectral licensing fees for it. The disadvantage is my phone is in my pocket, and if there was a Li-Fi thing on those lights up there, it's not going to ring because it can't see that light, right? It's got to be out. It's got to have the line of sight optical capability. But once that optical capability is in, I've done studies that could take an entire stadium, 100,000 people watching a football game, and every one of them could have multiple 4K videos streaming concurrently and simultaneously. Really hard to do that on anything that uses radio technology, but it's pretty straightforward with optical technology.
And we're looking at all this, and are all of these eventually going to have to play nice together, or are we just going to say some again, and then there's the interoperability issue, that some are going to take some momentum away, some are going to do this? There's never going to be one only player in the market.
No.
I mean, everybody would like to think that, but there's just not. It's just going to be...
That's an impossible task to get everybody hooked together to the same basic infrastructure.
We're seeing that with Apple, Google, and and Amazon going on. Amazon might rule the world. You guys might not think so, but right now they want to own everything. So
Yeah,
you guys might have to fight it out. But I'm just
impressive.
saying, right now it's just when it looks like what they're doing and what you guys want to do. I mean, you all have to play nice together, but there's parts of that fight that they have it in there, and we thought Apple was going to rule it. They rule the world, and Microsoft for a while, and then somebody else comes in with the new idea, and then they get knocked off the pinnacle, right? I mean,
Yeah.
it's an interesting way the things are fighting, and you guys have an interesting role to say we play nice with a lot of people. You have a ton of partners, right?
Yeah, we certainly do, and Cisco thinks that the partnership's really one of the key values of this because no one company can do everything well, right?
It's my point. That's my
you
point.
need the equivalent of gateways, which could be hardware boxes or could be sets of systems. The folks who are managing things and the folks who are repairing things. They all you need the equivalent of a connector, shall we say, between things. So Cisco definitely has got lots of partners in the space. And we work with Microsoft and IBM and SAP and a bunch of other companies.
You guys have ARM, right? You guys have a lot of those that you're still trying to kind of figure out the members that are inside the consortium, right? Those are members in them.
The consortium has there's 6 founding members. That's Cisco, Intel, ARM, and then we have Dell, Microsoft, and Princeton University. Those are the 6 founding members of the Open Fog Consortium. And together they represent a fairly broad-based view on what the IoT marketplace looks like.
So are those then, correct me if I'm wrong, are those considered partners to you guys or you see that there's a path to what's good for the space?
Yeah, well certainly in the standardization and multi-vendor consortium world,
Okay.
There's 65 members of the consortium, and we're really proud of the fact that 19 of them are academic institutions. So we've got this sort of crystal ball into the future from all of these universities on, I think, 4 or 5 different continents. And we're really proud of the fact that we've got this view on what the future looks like in the Open Fog Consortium and how fog and edge computing are vital to the IoT marketplace. The interoperability piece of the consortium, in fact, the board of directors, we asked them, what should the technologists emphasize? What are the 3 things that you want us to be the best at? And one of the board members stood up and said, interoperability, interoperability, interoperability. Those are the 3 things. Okay, so they understand that the primary role of the consortium is to figure out how all of these variabilities exist in the marketplace, especially in the marketplace like fog, where we're trying to understand how layers of computation are arranged between the cloud and the things. But they want to basically figure out how all of that stuff can play nicely together. And that's the role of the consortium. The consortium has mechanisms where we're doing a reference architecture that we published the first version of that last February. We're publishing a bunch of new use cases on an ongoing basis, and then we're publishing a set of requirements and a set of architectural guidelines coming up in another
So let me ask you this. Now I'm going to be a little bit tricky on this, and everyone's going to go, Peggy, you're getting a little tough up there, but why don't we see an Amazon, a Google, or an Apple really in these consortiums like we should? And the ones you do see, are you guys kind of like the Olympics? You guys are hugging and playing nice, but down deep you're like, no, we're only doing this because we have to. I mean, what is really happening here? Because I still feel for the good of the industry as a whole, for all these companies out there who just say, look, get on the same page, everyone. We'll buy your products, but get on the same page so we can all do it. It's kind of like a 4 to 20 milliamp. Everybody agreed, and look, now the construction industry has a standard, right?
Yeah.
Why can't tech companies get that way?
The so-called web scale companies, Amazon, Facebook, Google.
Oh, I left Facebook
Apple,
out. That's right.
Those kind of
Yeah.
those are the four that are
Zuckerberg, yeah.
typically talked about in the same breath. We invite them to come to the consortium, and they generally politely refuse. And
Politely refuse.
they do. You know, they're very nice. They're very smart. I don't have any problem with those companies.
You're saying that. You're at the Olympics right now. You're saying it's like the Olympics, but go ahead.
I think that the reason why they don't want to come in, this is all speculation. One of the reasons is I think that they think that they've got the power to influence the industry all by themselves.
Alexa does all by herself. She tells you things.
Yes.
If you ask her certain things, she tells you things that you know somebody programmed her to say that. But go ahead.
Yes, absolutely, and that influence is important. I think another reason is that there may be you know, just some sort of attitude, some swagger that might be involved with those companies. You know, if your stock is worth hundreds of billions of dollars, you know, why do you want to go work with, you know, little universities and stuff? Why do you want to give away your secret sauce, open your interfaces, when you could have otherwise had a better measure of control over that stuff, right? So I don't think they're stupid. I think they're very smart in terms of where they know that their share owners want them to go. But that might not necessarily be the best for the industry at large.
So then you have to think about who influences those dollar investments. So right now, consumers have all been buying these products and aren't saying enough. The voice of the consumer needs to be louder. So if the voice of the consumer says no, then that's going to change it. That's what you're saying. It just hasn't been loud enough. The buying power hasn't been loud enough to say, we're frustrated by this yet. We just haven't heard enough of that to change that, is what you're saying.
I think
because
you're exactly right. Yep.
once that happens and once they see it and it's going to affect their pocketbook, then that's when it'll change.
Right. And we'll see perhaps some government regulation step in. Perhaps not in the current climate, but in a few years, we might see regulation about minimum levels of security, or we might see regulation associated with systems that are inherently dangerous. They must have to, you know, somehow be certified.
So then, are you saying we should have regulation for interoperability and security? Are you saying, because there's a yin and a yang there on that concept? Are you encouraging that? I mean, because typically that's not what you guys want.
I think where the safety of the public is involved, we probably need to see a little bit of regulation. I think where commercial forces are the only thing that matters, then the Wild West is probably okay and let the market forces drive things in directions that they will.
Because we haven't, up to this point, we've brought product to market without the proper security, without the proper regulation, and that's part of the problem, and that's why we've had to redo these things over and over and over again.
The general public might get to the point where they start losing confidence, losing trust in our ability to do trustworthy Internet of Things networks. And that's no good for any ecosystem or any marketplace. We need to get out in front of that. And that's probably one of the reasons why organizations like the Open Fog Consortium and the IEEE are getting involved in trying to get some of this stuff standardized. We're trying to get out in front of the potential dangers by codifying some standards, codifying some interoperability documentation, and making that available. And we believe that the industry will generally gravitate towards solutions that feel like they're the right thing to do.
So if we dig deeper into some of the verticals, like when we talk about medical, you know, the healthcare things that we want, if we don't have some interoperability, we are now impacting lives.
Absolutely.
Because we're talking utility, healthcare, those kind of things where now the bad guys can get in. We talk about water. We talk about those critical infrastructure type things, healthcare, you know, people's, you know, medical devices. Now we're talking about something now is really going to impact people to understand, you know, is all of these are connected and everything's connected to our cities. Those bad actors get in, they can influence a whole lot of things in a whole lot of really bad ways.
Absolutely right. And one of the advantages of standards is it improves the ferocity of the ecosystem fighting against that stuff, right? So the ecosystem has a whole bunch of folks who know that we're all pulling in about the same direction, namely to keep the Internet of Things trustworthy, and that hopefully will bring more people into the standards community, and the people who are in the standards community are going to start taking a look at what's written in those hundreds of pages of documentation that organizations like OpenFog generate, and use that as guideposts for their product roadmaps and their product development.
I've never ever said this before, but I'm going to say it now. Are tech company executives like the Democrats and the Republicans? They just can't work together to figure this out. I mean, that's what just came to mind as I heard you talking, and it just sounds to me like really this just seems like it could be a lot easier than we've made it out to be for the past 20 years that I've been covering this space.
Well, there's always politics. One of my mentors gave me some really important advice in the day. They said that all political considerations outweigh any technical considerations. Right.
You're a tech guy. You're an architect of this.
I'm not saying that was easy to swallow, but my life got easier once I internalized that advice, because politics drives the money, and the money drives the products, and the products drive all of the stuff associated with interoperability and standards.
So we're really talking about when we started going public and we started saying that our market shares, that our investors wanted greater returns, that's when it all went out the window. Because now we just started looking at this. So let's talk about, we've got a few more minutes left. Let's talk about use cases. What are we seeing that's really the positive side of this? Because now we've just left everyone listening and watching going, what the heck just happened? Do we have some positive use cases of interoperability out there that's saying we're seeing some really good things happen though?
Oh, absolutely. We're seeing lots of interesting, especially the ones that fall on the space between traditional verticals. So think about a smart city where there's a bunch of street corner cabinets with some radio capabilities and some cameras and sensors and stuff on them. And think about smart transportation where there's lots of connected vehicles ripping around. My favorite conjunction of those two use cases is a drone delivery service. So think about a drone delivery service. Is that a transportation service? Is that a smart city thing because the ground support infrastructure of the city is essential to keep those drones on track? Is it a retail service? You know, if it's delivering from my pharmacy, is it a healthcare service? It's all of the above. And the interoperability between those various verticals allows those drones to transit safely through my smart city, land on my rooftop postal box and deliver my pizza or whatever it's going to do, right? Without interoperability, we're never going to have any chance at all of that system working the way that we all know it needs to work.
Right.
And,
talk about now really you guys at Cisco. Where are you guys saying you guys feel, you talked about where you guys fit in, where do you see the future with Cisco in really playing a role in driving interoperability forward? Cisco's role.
Yeah, well, we take a kind of an industry agnostic approach to interoperability. So we want to really ensure that we interoperate with any environment, with all of our partners and other systems on the marketplace, all the different verticals, cloud.
You guys are the Switzerland.
Yeah, maybe that's one way to look at it. We certainly have products. We have our Connect product, which is a sort of a data abstraction model that enables different sensor readings from perhaps widely different industries or widely different protocols to all be put together in a kind of a common database and all used by common sets of analytics. We have a common control infrastructure that knows things like SIM management for wireless and knows how to establish IP addressing and so on. So all that together, when taken in a holistic approach, we think puts Cisco in a fairly unique position to be out there and actually generate IoT architectures that really work for our industry and work for all these verticals, work for all these different use cases and scenarios.
Chuck, with all your years of experience as someone who's got 69 patents, what advice would you give someone who's in this space right now and say, here's what you need to do. You're evaluating all this. You need, if you haven't jumped in, you're in trouble, right, in the IoT space right now.
Yeah, you're late.
But
sure.
if you really have to do this right now and you're trying to figure out this interoperability, is there something you would say that they really need to do, and this is the best thing to evaluate? I mean, you've described, hundreds of them, but we've got to get them doing something. They can't just sit on the sidelines forever.
Yeah, well, first thing, find decent partner companies that really have some track record in the industry. Cisco is certainly an interesting choice for many aspects of that. The second thing you might want to do is get out there and embrace this whole standards community. So figure out what part of the IoT you're interested in working on, and then figure out what standards bodies might be involved in codifying how that's going to work. And don't just sit on the sidelines and listen to the standards. Get out there, join those bodies, and help them develop them.
And your consortium first,
The
OpenFog?
Open Fog Consortium, you can find out all about it at www.openfogconsortium.org.
Chuck, I really appreciate all the time you spent with us. That's all the time we have for today. We really appreciate it. All right, Chuck, thank you again. Chuck Byers is the principal engineer and platform architect for Cisco's Corporate Strategic Innovation Group. Chuck, thank you so
Thanks,
much.
Peggy.
I appreciate it.
Much appreciated. Great
All right,
fun.
listeners, we are out of time, but you know you can find us at www.thepeggysmedleyshow.com or connectedworld.com. So as always, thanks for listening, and you can tweet us at ConnectedWMag. And thanks for listening. This is the Peggy Smedley Show, the podcasting voice of IoT and relevant technology. Remember, with great technology comes great responsibility.